Welcome to Life Expansion After 50 podcast. Today's episode, we're talking about the emotional area and the related cognitive biases. Before jumping into the cognitive biases that trigger the emotional area, I'd like to point out a few things about emotions. First and foremost, we misuse them typically. They were never meant to be dwelled upon, but rather emotions are like energy in motion. Ideally, we should be letting the emotion pass through. According to Dr. Joan Rosenberg in her book, 90 Seconds to a Life You Love, it only takes 90 seconds to let an emotion flow all the way through us. However, it can be such a rush of energy that it's uncomfortable, and in the case of negative emotions, people just can't stand it. So they try and suppress the emotion. Well, this blocks its passing. Now, I may not be saying this next part with 100% scientific accuracy, but in doing so, we're transforming that energy into a feeling. You may think it's the same thing, but it's not. A feeling is a neurobiological, or it could have a chemical basis. Once the emotion becomes a feeling, it has the potential to be stored in our nervous system. That's why you can locate where you feel intense emotions in your body. Now, there is a process for getting these stored emotions dislodged, so to speak, and more importantly, getting to the point where emotions flow through in the first place. You can try it the next time something happens. Think of the rush of the emotion like riding a wave. It will peak and then subside. You stay calm, breathe through it, and tune into what the emotion is there to tell you. There's a model or an acronym called RAIN, R-A-I-N. You recognize the emotion, you acknowledge it, and understand that it's there to tell you something, inform you of something, make you aware of something, and then you investigate it, you get curious about it, you dig in and see if you can sense more about that emotion. And then the last part is nurtured. So self-nurturing, breathing, mindfulness exercises, reminding yourself that everything's going to be all right, etc. Maybe do some light meditation, go for a walk. The point is, this is a way to let the emotion flow through, which is what we should be doing, and getting into the habit of doing that. So when you're hit with an emotional storm unsuspectedly, you automatically go into that RAIN model and let it flow. Now, emotions are a great source for us to learn from, but like anything, it's a process too. I'll cover that in the next episode along with other strategies that are available to us. Of all the 7 fitness areas, my opinion is the emotional area is both the greatest source of derailment, as people can get triggered and do something rash, literally destroying in minutes what may have taken years to develop. And at the same time, it could be one's greatest source of power. I mentioned this in one of the episodes earlier, as a placebo and the nocebo effect. There are examples of people reaching new success heights fueled by a passion or an emotion. But first, let's look at the list of cognitive biases that can trigger a person into poor choices. And then in the next episode, we'll look at the positive ones. Now, emotional contagion is the first one. There's the phenomena where an individual's emotions and related behaviors can be influenced by the emotions of others. This is likely what's at play with mob behavior. It can result in a person being overly influenced by the emotional states of others, leading to impulsive and irrational decisions. You can see why people who have lived with someone who is emotionally unstable can also have some healing to do themselves. The next one is impulsivity bias. It's the tendency to act on immediate impulses without considering long-term consequences. This sounds like triggered behavior to me. When a person is acting irrationally, you can sense that they're out of touch with what's really going on. I imagine it to be an emotion from the past, maybe that rose to the surface because a related neural pathway or set of connections were triggered. The result is making hasty decisions driven by intense emotions without adequately weighing the potential outcomes. Now, fear of missing out. We've heard that one before. This can be thought of as anxiety or apprehension individuals feel when they believe others are experiencing something enjoyable or beneficial, maybe at the root of some hater behavior. Since I tend to look at the world through a neural change lens lately, which includes the neurotransmitter dopamine and the hormone serotonin, I may be reaching, but it's evident when a person has a serotonin dip. I've called serotonin the one-upmanship hormone. It also goes down when a person feels one-upped, and it can lead to sadness and even depression if serotonin levels remain low for too long. Fun fact, serotonin is primarily in the gut, not the brain. Something like 90% of it is in the gut. When experiencing this anxiety, impulsive choices can result, driven by the fear of missing out on opportunities, leading to rash decisions. Negativity bias is focusing more on negative experiences than positive ones. This is probably at the core of so many issues. Neutral information can be seen as negative. Minor changes can be seen as catastrophic once you get those neurons associating and catastrophizing. Of course, allowing negative emotions to overshadow positive aspects, potentially leading to pessimistic and irrational choices. I've been in conversations where people argue for their weaknesses and simultaneously argue for the environment's prowess, and yet cannot see the role that they play in their resulting mental state. This is a good place to mention what I call business-related anxiety. I call it that because I want to be clear I'm not discussing mental health. However, you can see how if a person stays in that state where they're arguing for their weaknesses and for the opposition's strengths, you can see how this can lead to sadness, stress, more anxiety, and on and on. What people who get to this place seem to have a hard time seeing is that it began with their own thoughts. Next, we have recency bias. It's the giving more weight to recent events when making judgments. I've lived through enough exorbitant gas price hikes and also recessions. One of the things that's always fascinating to me is how quickly people dump their SUVs when gas prices go up. Of course, I'm talking like jumps of 20% or more. To be clear, there's likely a piling on effect because dealers are dumping their inventory, making the SUV prices plummet farther. But it's still interesting how people cannot see the seasonal trend at play or perhaps a short-term impact like a shipping problem, something that will be resolved. They just dump the SUVs and start buying fuel-efficient cars, and it happens in like weeks. It's so quick. Essentially, this cognitive bias leads to overreacting to recent emotional experiences without considering the broader emotional context, leading to more impulsive decisions. And impulsive decisions tend to be poor judgment, poor decisions. Anchoring bias is relying too heavily on the first piece of emotional information that was encountered. Anyone who's been in an argument with someone who has been triggered has likely seen this before. The result is letting initial emotional reactions heavily influence subsequent choices, potentially leading to biased decisions. Then we have self-serving bias, which is attributing positive emotions to one's own character and negative emotions to external factors. This one makes it hard to correct course or even accept feedback. In Army Officer School, we had a new leadership quote every single day that we had to memorize. There was one that stuck with me that said, "Responsibility devolves upon the leader. Privileges are what he ought not have, but takes." Obviously, this was directed at the tendency for self-serving behavior. We've seen so many of these cognitive biases impacting other areas of the 7 as well. The point of bringing them up in the emotional area is because they can be much more sinister, as the emotions can take us on a roller coaster of bad to worse decisions. How many leaders have we seen in the last decade exhibiting absolutely deplorable behavior? And the worst part, it seems to be becoming more and more acceptable as people become numb. When these behaviors surface, people are quick to justify the emotionally driven decisions by attributing positive emotions to their own personal traits and negative emotions to external factors and circumstances, when in reality, they own them all. Catastrophizing is magnifying or imagining the worst possible outcomes of a situation. I've seen this take on a life of its own. As a mentor and coach, I will typically just get out of the way and let the emotion run its course. If I push against it, it's like giving a kite a bit of wind to soar on, and it just goes higher and higher. If not caught early enough, these intense emotions, such as fear or anxiety, can drive decisions based on exaggerated negative expectations. It's sad to watch because it was so avoidable. But once they're in it, unless there's someone there to break their pattern, it can be hours before returning to stasis. Now, there's a lot to be said for simply going to bed, since now we know it's largely neurons firing back and forth, and basically the neurobiology is out of control, leading to chaos in our internal system. Going to bed puts it at rest. Next, we have over-identification, excessively connecting personal emotions to external events. Now, I can see this at play in mob behavior as well, but can also be seen in the workplace when rumors go unchecked. The impact is that allowing emotions related to external events to disproportionately influence one's own emotions. This can lead to impulsive actions. Availability heuristic, we've heard this one as well, is relying on readily available emotional information rather than comprehensive analysis. More and more, I'm seeing that following the simple rule prompted by a quote from Albert Einstein. He said if he has 1 hour to solve a problem, he'll spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. That simple step, if you apply critical and or first principle thinking, can take you out of that loop that the unconscious puts us in. Making decisions based on emotional salient events without considering a broader emotional perspective leads to biased choices, choices that likely would not have been made had it not been for the emotional impact. Another reason why I put the emotional area in the middle of my 7 fitness areas graphic, and I call it the gateway to the right side where what we want resides. We have attribution bias, which is attributing emotional states to oneself or others based on perceptions. This is a big one because although people know perceptions come into play, they often lack the tools to stop the attribution when it's happening. A simple act of shifting your point of view, looking at it from a different angle, can be all it takes. Something I did before I knew about neural change as I do today was to use the metaphor of a plane circling a strange airfield in the bush before landing. It works well to keep the initial impulse as just a data point, and it goes like this. If you were flying a plane over a jungle and decided you needed to land at an airfield that you spotted in the jungle, chances are you would circle several times before landing. I think we should apply this same approach before we make important decisions. Look at that situation from different points of view. Spend more time clearly defining the problem. Of course, making decisions influenced by inaccurate attributions due to emotional states will likely lead to misunderstandings and more poor choices. Emotional reasoning bias. This is using emotions rather than evidence or rational thinking as the basis for judgments. It would be interesting to take an inventory of how much wealth was lost strictly due to poorly derived emotional judgments without regard for rational thinking. We've all been there, and it's hard when you're in it. A lot of my above the line and crossing the river work has to do with building in the tools before they're needed. Once the right associations are in place, which can be done with implementation intentions and other strategies, resisting the urges from these cognitive biases gets easier because you catch the impulse before it spreads to other neural pathways. And finally, we have hedonic editing. This is evaluating and comparing emotional experiences in the way that maximizes pleasure and minimizes pain. It reminds me of the saying, the end justifies the means. We can always find a way to rationalize something in our favor. Rely on this too much, and it may be hard to get back to the truth. It can seem impossible sometimes. Constantly making choices that prioritize short-term emotional gratification while overlooking long-term emotional well-being is a recipe for disaster. In one of my 7 Fitness Series episodes, I pointed out that the emotional area can act like a placebo or a nocebo. In keeping with that line of thinking, I'm going to provide some cognitive biases that work in our favor. This will be in the next episode. This is a good time, again, to clarify the reason for going through all these cognitive biases. It's not so we remember them, but rather we are aware of how they work. And this becomes the beginning of regaining control from our unconscious as we figure out how to not be sent into stimulus response behavior. We've taken a major step to slowing down our initial reaction, which gives our conscious mind a chance to engage. Recognizing and understanding these emotional biases can empower individuals to navigate their emotional landscapes more effectively, leading to more balanced and rational decision-making. Embracing emotional intelligence, mindfulness, and self-awareness practices can also contribute to emotional fitness and resilience. There's so much to cover on this topic. Like I said, I'm going to do it in 2 parts. The part 2 will focus on other factors involving the emotional area, as well as steps we can take to regain control. The nice thing about it is that it works both ways. We can use the emotional area to supercharge our efforts as well, as I've mentioned before. In the next one, I'll briefly cover some of the positive emotions related to cognitive biases and then get into strategies to manage this area of our lives. Fun fact about emotions. You've heard me mention the 90 seconds. They tell me that in the hunter-gatherer time, the emotions were there because sitting around in the tribe, if a person bit into a piece of fruit or some vegetable, it would show on their face immediately if there was something wrong with it, and everybody in the tribe would instantly learn. Remember, this goes way back before there was language. They would know instantly that there was a problem with whatever it was that person ate. I remember when emotional intelligence first started becoming a big thing in the corporate world, I remember reading somewhere that we have 700 muscles in our face, and most of them are involuntary, and the face is the only place where the skin is connected directly to the muscles. The reason for that is the instantaneous display of emotions on one's face. This is why people who play poker, they go through great lengths to cover up the emotions in their face. It gets back to why, they say communication is 7% words, 38% tone and nonverbals, and then 55% physiology, because we show so much information on our face. It's out of scope for this episode, but I just want to point out that 7% words, I would not take that to mean the receiving words. In sales, I lean very heavily on the words that the person is telling me. I make the assumption that they are intentionally saying exactly what they mean to say, and those words are telling me what's going on inside their nervous system, as well as their brain and their belief system. Now, they may not mean to tell me what's going on in their belief system, but those words tell me a lot. So when I'm hearing words, I don't think of them as being only 7% of the communication. I think the bigger point in that 7, 38, 55% is that the physiological aspect of communication is much greater than people think. And with that, I'm going to leave it. We'll talk to you in the next episode. Take care.